I want to thank everyone for being here today. It's a pleasure to be in London after an overnight flight from San Francisco. I'm here today because international support, particularly from the United Kingdom, is of enormous importance in our fight to save and free Mumia Abu-Jamal, who has been on death row in Pennsylvania for nearly 3 decades. You mentioned his politics being a reason for his being on death row. I have to point out also that an integral factor in his being placed on death row is the fact that Mumia is black. And in the 28 years he's been on death row, he has written 6 books from a small, dimly lit cell, and we need to remember that when he was arrested, he was a very prominent journalist. And the authorities thought when they put him on death row, they would silence his pen, his voice, they would kill him. In fact, he's become more outspoken and more heard by more people around the world today than when he was free 3 decades ago. And he will not shut up. They are not going to shut him up. And that's what all of this is about. You pointed out politics is to silence that voice, to silence that pen, so people will not read and hear his voice and his pen about issues that affect in regard to injustices that occur around the world. We are arguing the case on November 9, 2010 in the United States Court of Appeals for the 3rd Circuit in Philadelphia. There's one issue before the court, and that is the death penalty. The government, I specialize in human rights work primarily dealing with death penalty cases. I've handled hundreds. And in every case, the government always wants to kill my client. But I have never seen such passion, such zealousness to kill a client as the effort is to kill Mumia. The 350,000 member Fraternal Order of Police spoke out 2 weeks ago at a showing of a film they have that's calling for the death of Mumia, that has some absurd, stupid theories. They have spent an enormous amount of money and will continue to do so. They're doing everything possible to kill this man who is so important. We need to remember that there are over 20,000 men, women, and children on death rows around the world. Mumia has become a symbol in the fight against the death penalty, against genocide, and against man's inhumanity to man, women, and children. And this fight is about him, my client, my longtime friend, but this fight is also him as a symbol in the fight for all of these 20,000 people awaiting execution. And what you are doing, particularly Pan-African and your colleagues, other organizations, is so important. I remember speaking at a function of yours I believe it was early this year, in June. And I was so impressed to walk into that meeting hall, and it was full of people thousands of miles away from America and where Mumia is sitting on death row, but people who said, we care, we want our voices heard. And I will tell you that your efforts, if you keep making noise, it's a stimulus to what we're doing. This is a very difficult fight. I constantly get threats on my life for fighting for Mumia. It's a very, sometimes, lonely and discouraging fight. We now see that the government and the Fraternal Order of Police have even infiltrated some of our groups in America that are supposedly for Mumia. In February, I spoke at the World Conference.Against the Death Penalty in Geneva. I was shocked to learn later that there was a secret memorandum within the organizations running that conference in which they were trying to block Mumia. They said, we're against the death penalty, but we will not speak out. We should not get involved in Mumia Abu-Jamal's case, because he's, in effect, what they were saying is he's radioactive, he's outspoken, he doesn't shut up, he keeps talking about injustice. And they tried to block him. He was supposed to have called the final night of that conference in February to speak on behalf of all of these people in death rows around the world who are victims, and they tried to block the call. He called anyway to me on my phone, my BlackBerry, and I'm sitting in the audience of 1,000, 1,500 people, and Mumia called And so I went up on stage, the moderator who happens to be black, he's a very prominent radio person in France, let me speak. I put this on speakerphone, and I asked Mumia, I said, you're speaking for all the people. What is it like? And he said, well, I'm standing literally in my cell on death row. They've handed me the phone. And he talked about the hell of daily, what it's like for all of these people facing death daily, that there's a thread running through their lives, and that is they get up in the morning until they go to bed at night. They know that they're under a death. They're waiting to be executed, their date with the executioner. And I will tell you, I was in Paris recently. We had been invited to be on a program at the Paris bar. Then that was canceled again, and so nobody actually spoke from. It was supposed to be. It was about death row in America, and yet nobody spoke from death row in America, even though Mumia had been scheduled. It's what we call the Mumia exception. These caviar liberals, who abolitionists, who say, okay, we're against the death penalty, but not for MUMAI ABU-JAMAL. He's too outspoken. And I will tell you, Mumia, to the core of his soul, is still a Black Panther, what the Black Panther Party stood for. Many years ago, he was very active in the Panther Party. That's when he started his journalism as a teenager in the Panther Party. And that spirit of fighting against racism, against injustice, against ill treatment by the authorities of women and children and the poor, he still speaks out, and that Panther spirit lives on in him. He's nonviolent, but he's very aggressively against people's government injustice and abuse of people, particularly people who cannot help themselves. And finally, I would like to point out that when Mumia was arrested in December of 1981, he was already known in Philadelphia as the voice of the voiceless, because he spoke out against people who could not speak for themselves. And that today that voice is stronger and heard by more people than ever before, and we must not let the government silence that voice. We must not let them execute him. And I will tell you that in all the years Mumia has been on death row, which is he has not left it for 1 second in all these years, he has never been in greater danger than he is today as we're sitting here. And so again, I want to
Could you summarize why that is legally?